the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe, for the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Don't dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, plans in our hands, progress where every voice stands. In the progress, from the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Strong and keen. Tune in every Wednesday, feel the realities, stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress. Dive into the discussion, let's support one another. In the heart of our nation, where voices collide, we're breaking down the policies with truth as our guide. With clarity on the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe, for the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Don't dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, plans in our hands, progress where every voice stands. In the progress, from the ground impact the oil and gas scene, oil and gas scene. Together we'll build a future strong and keen. Strong and keen. Tune in every Wednesday. Feel the live teams out. Stories and insights that we all prescribe. As policies and progress. Dive into every discussion. Let's support one another.
One guy on a land that's so grand. Rivers flow through golden sand. From the mountains to the coast, this is the place I love the most. In the fields where children play, morning sun greets a brand new day. From Georgetown's busy street to the villages so sweet. Guyana, I love you so. The only place I've ever known. Underneath the sky so blue. Guyana, my heart's with you. Wooden houses, market squares, friendly smiles are everywhere. Through the jungle, out to sea, this is where I long to be. Colors bright and stories old, heritage like veins of gold. In the songs that people sing, feel the joy that each one brings. Guyana, I love you so. The only place I've ever known. Underneath the sky so blue. Guyana, my heart's with you. Houses, market squares, friendly smiles are everywhere. Through the jungle, out to sea, this is where I long to be. Colors bright and stories old, heritage like veins of gold. In the songs that people sing, feel the joy that each one brings. Guyana, I love you so. The only place I've ever known. Underneath the sky so blue. Guyana, my heart's with you.
Stretch wide and free, rivers dance down to the sea. Golden sunrise warms the air, nature's splendor everywhere. Jaguar moves with silent grace, monkeys swing from place to place. Birds in colors, bright and true, rainbow wings and skies of blue. Guyana's magic all around, in every leaf, in every sound. From forest deep to mountain high, a paradise beneath the sky.
In the heart of our nation, where voices collide, we're breaking down the policies with truth as our guide. With clarity on the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas sea, together we'll build a future strong and key. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe. For the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the
Good night, and welcome to Behind the Agenda, Plans, Policies, and Progress. Welcome to our debut episode. We're happy to have you here. Good night to all the persons joining us across the 10 administrative regions. Good night to the persons joining us across the diaspora. Thank you for being here for this first episode. I'm going to ask everybody in the comment section to just share the live so we can get the. Agree, this is not that type of show. We don't have call-ins here, right? So no, you keep that for the morning program, right? So guys, share the live. Let's get the message out there. And again, I'm happy to be here with you for this debut episode, where we will be taking a look at the critical issues shaping our nation's future. I'm your host, Cordell Jones, and again, I'm so excited to have you guys here for this first episode. Now, tonight we will be addressing two pressing topics: the government's latest measures to tackle the cost of living and inflation, and the complexities surrounding Guyana's burgeoning oil and gas sector. Now, recently, the government introduced new measures aimed at alleviating the rising cost of living. But what do these measures mean for our fiscal sustainability? What risk might they entail? And importantly, how will they impact you, the everyday Guyanese citizens? We'll also discuss the Customer Price Index, a crucial indicator when you're measuring inflation. Now, other than that, we'll also take a look at the oil and gas arena. Now, Suriname has recently made headlines with its first final investment decision in Block 58. Now, the Surinamese National Oil and Gas Company head, it has been suggested that he would have said that Suriname had a better fiscal deal than Guyana. What does that mean for our economy? And how does Suriname's fiscal regime and policies compare to those of Guyana? And why is this comparison vital? To help us navigate these discussions, we have a very special guest, Mr. Joel Bagwudin, a respected financial analyst with extensive knowledge of Guyana's economic landscape. We are here to see clarity amidst all the noise and understand the complex issues that shape our economic landscape and our future prosperity, the prosperity of Guyana. So with that said, allow me to welcome on screen Mr. Joel Bagwudin. You've seen him. He's been on, what's Freddie's show? The Freddie Kassoon show. You've seen him on different social media platforms. He usually writes and gives his take on a lot of these issues in the papers and on social media. Joel, thank you for being with us here. Our first show out, and we can continue in this vein. Welcome.
Thank you, Cordell. Thank you for having me. Good evening to your viewers. And I'm excited to do this program with you, jointly with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's always good to have you because you have a deep understanding of things and you're able to break it down into, I like to say, layman terms so that the common man can understand what is actually going on. So, Joel, let's jump right into it. Now, the government would have announced a $100,000 grant to persons 18 years and above. What are the implications of these measures for fiscal sustainability?
So thank you again, Cordell, and thank you for kicking off the program with that question, particularly because I've been overwhelmed from the very day the announcement was made to up to this point here where we are tonight.
Mm,
I've been overwhelmed with questions. I've been overwhelmed with phone calls from many different uh, persons, stakeholders, private sector, individuals, members from the public about this question. And I've also seen a lot of export or so-called export commentaries on the implications within the public space in the letter section of the mainstream media,
right,
where commentators, public commentators, other public commentators, particularly those aligned with the opposition or opposition apologists and or opposition apologists, have been talking about the implications, have been talking about inflation, have been talking about fiscal sustainability, but in a rather very surface level, very generic, very superficial. And this is why I'm happy
mm,
to be part on a program like this, where I'm going to take my time to explain in some amount of detail and depth in a manner that the average person, that the average lay person could understand.
right,
So, so here we go. What are the fiscal sustainability risks? First, when we speak of fiscal sustainability risks, we are essentially talking about, can the public finances of the state or of the government, can we afford this kind of payout? And what would be the implication for the average household or for the average person and for businesses with this size of payout? It's a very large size of payout in terms of a one-off cash grant compared to the cash grant that we pay out in the COVID-19 period. Now,
right,
if you look at the size of our budget, the last budget, and I've made this argument during the budget debate on national television as well, when the question was asked, every year, the budget has been increasing. There is no year, there is from since 1992 to now, at least from since when data is available, from the early 90s, budgets have been increasing. I've never seen a major cut of budget, save and except for that period in 2011, 2014, when you had the minority
right,
government and position control in National Assembly. That was the only period in which, due to the political dispensation at that time, opposition control slashed the budgets.
right,
Other than that, budgets have always been increasing. So every year, when the budget numbers when the budget number is announced, people get excited. Oh, it's the biggest budget in history, but it will always be the biggest budget relative to the previous year. But the way we have to look at this thing is, the budget is in relationship to something. And in relationship to what? In relationship to the size of the economy. So if we look at the size of the budget over a period of time from 1990 or 1992 to present, in relationship
right,
size of the economy, which is measured by something called GDP, which is the total value of goods and services produced in the economy, we have had the largest budget in the early 90s, where the size of the budget was as high as 60% of GDP in 1992 and and several other years in the 90s. 60% of GDP, those are substantially large budgets. Our budget today in relation to GDP is half. 2024 budget is 30% of GDP compared to 60% of GDP. So we really don't have a large budget per se if you look at it from that perspective. And I explain this
mm,
because I want people to understand how do you really assess the risk when we speak of fiscal sustainability risk or fiscal risks. What is the size of public expenditure in relationship to GDP? So when you
right,
look at the numbers and the size of our GDP and projected growth for 2024, and you make the adjustments for supplementary supplementary approvals, supplementary expenditure during the course of the year, and we add these measures, it will not go, and then if we add 30% projected growth in GDP, it will remain within that region, 30% of GDP. So
mm,
we can therefore say from that perspective, the fiscal risk from that one dimension alone is is minimal. We can It is
mm,
within the sustainable framework. It has not exposed our fiscal sustainability framework. In the event there is some eventuality, for example, like how we had the pandemic, right?
right,
That not be able to contend with an unforeseen eventuality of that nature.
right, right. No,
Secondly, yeah,
go ahead, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. I'll remember myself.
No, so we you basically gave us an idea about the implications of these fiscal matters, and you spoke of risk, and I'm thinking probably that is what you were going on to go into some detail about. Um, we have, and you've mentioned here just now, you've been hearing a lot of talk about the risk involved. Some people even talking about the possibility of hyperinflation. Now, you've established that this grant is fiscally sustainable. Um, Talk a little more about the risk for me and what the possibilities are in terms of risk for hyperinflation or any type of inflation based on this grant.
Now, so Cardell, you speaking as though you're reading my mind, because that is exactly what I'm going to get now in
Right,
some greater detail. What I sought to do just now was to establish the framework of fiscal sustainability, right? And I haven't gone into depth. I haven't talked about the size of non-oil revenue and the size of oil revenue and put that together in relation to GDP and the size of our expenditure and the fiscal deficit, which is about 10 or 11% of GDP, which is sustainable, right? This payout, these
right,
measures that were announced would not substantially materially impact those fiscal indicators which are considered to be sustainable as it is, because you have GDP is projected to grow by 30% this year. So no material, I
right,
don't envisage any, based on my calculations, any material changes to those fiscal sustainability indicators with the considering these measures that were announced. Now, I want to now spend some time to talk about inflation and to explain the inflationary risks, because I have
mm,
seen a lot of misconceptions. And up to this point, there is one particular media house that has dedicated a series, as well as export commentaries from their contributors, from their columnists, from accountants, and other economists in that newspaper, have been
yeah,
writing about inflation, have been writing about or talking about concepts such as overheating of the economy, talking about Dutch disease for the past four and a half, for the past 4 years, 4+ years. But what we haven't seen up to today is, particularly from the expert commentators, the accountants and economists, the chartered accountants slash attorneys and economists, how do you really deal with inflation? The manner in which this government has opted to confront the inflationary pressure to bring some sort of relief to cushion the impact is one way, which is within an expansionary fiscal framework or an expansionary fiscal policy agenda. And to contend
Mm.
with inflation within an expansionary agenda is not an easy thing. The textbook manner in which, though students of economics and students of finance would learn in economic theory that when you have high rates of inflation or overheating, the concept of overheating, policymakers seek to deliberately slow down the growth of the economy. And how do you do that?
Okay.
Now, in fiscal policies or economic policy, you have fiscal policy and monetary policy. And you could either have an expansionary fiscal agenda or you could have a contractionary fiscal agenda. This country has been on an expansionary path for the longest from since 1992, save and except for the
Mm.
period 2015 2020. And I'll explain the implications there. We have been
Mm.
on an expansionary agenda, and that is because it is it is needed. We are an underdeveloped economy. We need to grow our economy. We need to develop industries. We need to build our infrastructure, and therefore that is inevitably expansionary, which is necessary, which is absolutely necessary. Contractionary is to slow down the economy, is when the economy is growing too fast. Like, for example, students of economics who are following international finance news, for example, and reading The Economist and
Mm.
following what happens in the US, you would read financial news or the Fed cut interest rates. And that has big implications. And you have all the best analysts and economists in the world analyzing the implication when the Fed when the Fed cut raise interest rate by 2 basis points. What is the implication for the United States economy, the largest economy in the world, and the rest of the world, the global economy within which it operates? And
Right.
if it cuts interest rate by 2 or 3 basis points, what does that mean? What are the implications? We don't have that kind of debate here in Guyana, unfortunately, which is absent within when budgets are being debated. And no one has talked about that. And this is what I want to dedicate, this is what I want to spend some time to explain for people to understand that we have all kinds of discussions and misconceptions and talk and debates about inflation and that the government is not doing enough and that the government need to pump more economy to contend with inflation. Now, in economic theory, when you hear about pumping money into the economy to curtail inflation, it doesn't make sense because the theory says when you pump more money, inject more money into the system, that is inflationary. That's the theory.
Mm.
But how come are we still pumping money? How come are we still injecting all this money? We still pursuing an expansionary agenda, and we're managing to contain our inflation rate. We're managing to not allow it to go runaway inflation or hyperinflation or overheating of the economy. And I'll explain this, but let's talk a little bit about what if the government chose to do the textbook option. Suppose the government say, okay, these people have legitimate concerns and we have high inflation rates or high prices in the market or high cost of living. Then we need to slow down the economy. What do you do in that? What type of policies, contractionary policies, you would pursue? On the monetary side, the central bank would raise interest rates. Our central bank hasn't raised the interest rate for the longest time because we've been on an expansionary path for the longest time since 1992.
Wow. Okay.
Now,
Okay.
so if the government say, okay, let's slow down inflation, let's let's slow down the rate of growth. So this on the monetary side, the central bank would have to raise interest rates. Raise interest rates on what? On what? Exactly. So the financial institutions, just like how individuals, we bank our money with the commercial banks. The commercial banks, they take their excess money and they have accounts with the central
Back
bank.
to Guyana.
So they bank with the
Yeah.
central bank. The commercial banks, the deposits that are sitting in the central bank, they earn an interest. Now, if you look at the interest rate that the commercial banks apply to savings, the savings interest rate is is determined by the interest rate that they earn on their deposits in the central bank. And that
Okay.
is the interest rate we're talking about. Now, if the goal to slow inflation is contractionary, let's slow down growth, then the central bank would decide to raise those interest rates, which means the commercial banks would earn more money. They will earn a higher return based on those high interest rates, which means they would also raise interest rates on savings. Because by raising interest rate on savings now for the depositors, you earn more interest. And so
Mm.
the way the theory works is that people will save more because of high interest rate. The interest rate right now on savings is 0.5, 0.8, 1.25%. Suppose interest rate goes up to 5% or 6%. And some investments that people are some people, some businesses are giving you 5% net return on your investment, annual
Okay.
return. It might make sense to take a 6 or 7%. That makes more sense. You're getting a higher return. So people, instead of spending and investing, they'll save. Now that is the contractionary monetary tool or monetary instrument to slow down the rate of growth in the money supply. Because the banks won't lend, people would save. So you curtail lending because people want to earn higher interest rate on their savings. What
Mm.
happens on the fiscal side now? On the fiscal side, you raise taxes. So when you raise taxes, what happens? If you raise taxes, companies would, the private sector would cry out, they would curtail investment, investments would slow down, production would slow down, and what happens? Unemployment goes up, you have pay cuts, you have job cuts, and you have pay cuts. That is what follows. And this is how policymakers ordinarily deal with inflation or high
Mm.
cost of living. We haven't chosen that because the implication of that option is not our desired, is not the desired outcome, is not our objective, and it will hurt us in a much bigger way.
Right.
If you have job cuts and the oil companies cut production, so local content slow down, oil production slow down, the capital projects slow down, consumption spending slow down. Companies are cutting jobs and cutting pay. That is how you deal with inflation, according to the textbook, right?
Right.
We haven't had anybody explain this up to this point. And so should we now argue the case for the government to go this option because we have rising prices? That's another big problem. And no, the government don't want to go. So what have they been doing? So what is the alternative? How do you contain prices? How do you contain escalation in prices within an expansionary agenda? Now let's talk about the capital side. On the capital side of the budget, on the capital spending, you would notice, and if you pay attention to the government, that budget 2024 particularly, there is no new project. All the capital spend Budget 2024 and Budget 2025 will be allocation to continue multi-year projects that have been started. So you have the gas to energy, you have the
Mm.
Demerara, you have the new bridge across the river, you have all the schools, you have the 5 hospitals, you have all the roads. Those projects have to be completed. Now that is deliberate on the part of the government to manage to avert overheating of the economy. That I see some chartered accountants talking
Okay.
about overheating. That is precisely why the government has not done that. If they introduce more projects, start new projects, we are going to have an overheating problem. It will create more shortages in the economy for supplies, for building materials, for labor as well. And that is when you'll have overheating and you have a
Yeah.
problem. So, on the capital side of the budget, there is no new project, and that is deliberately, it is the government's way of managing overheating. On the recurrent side of the budget, what have they done on that side of the budget? Recurrent expenditure has increased, or they have increased it incrementally. No big increases. Because that side of the budget, if you have massive increases, if you equate it or you have parallel increases, like how they increase the capital budget by 100% compared to the pre-oil budget, more than 100% compared to the pre-oil budget, we'll have problems. Suppose oil price collapse tomorrow to $30. We're in trouble. We can't sustain the recurrent side. And this
Right.
is why this one-off cash grant is not on an annual basis, because you have an oil price crash tomorrow or oil price fall to $30 or $40, you can't sustain it. And you have to roll back. That creates more problem, right?
Yeah.
So what they have done, the other thing, the other alternative to contend with inflation in within an expansionary agenda is to increase supply, the law of demand and supply.
Right.
When demand outstrips supply, you have high prices. So how do you achieve equilibrium prices? So remember I talk about contractionary. Let's talk
Correct.
about alternative now. The alternative within an expansionary agenda, because we don't want to raise taxes, we don't want to raise interest rate to slow down the economy, cut jobs, and cut pay,
Right.
and put people out of business and put people out of a living and drive people into poverty, which would create a long string of social problems in our society as well, crime,
Indeed.
suicide, and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you do within an expansionary agenda? You got to increase supply. You got to invest in the supply side. You got to build out the supply side. That is why we have the food security agenda. That's why we got to build out the agriculture sector, increase food production. That's why we got to have the gas to energy to cut electricity costs so that we could have a more competitive manufacturing sector to increase our production. Because as you
Mm.
increase production, that to a level that matches the level of supply, then you reach equilibrium prices. And this is the path that the government has chosen. And this is what they're managing by spending heavily on the supply side in building out the infrastructure, we got to build out the port, we got to build the
Right.
business, we got to build the farm to market roads, we got to build the hospitals too, we got to build the schools, the infrastructure, right? And so that is the path that we're on. The third thing is coming back now specifically to the measures. So we talk about the risk, we talk about the different implications and the different economic theory and how you apply it to solve the
Right.
same problem and the implications of the different ways of solving the same problem, right? And you would agree that we don't want to go to contractionary, we don't want to slow down the economy. So what do we do? What has the government now, thirdly, what have they been doing in the meanwhile, in the interim? They got to subsidize cost. And this is what the measures are aimed at,
Right.
subsidizing. Before these measures were announced, I had done quantitative analysis, quantify all the implicit and explicit measures in the budget. For example, the fuel subsidy, reducing the excise tax from 50% to 0%, subsidizing electricity cost, which is in excess of $20 billion, maybe $30 billion by now, because you
Wow.
still have elevated oil prices, subsidizing water rates. The measures in the telecommunication sector, liberalizing the telecommunication sector, removing VAT on data and on mobile devices. That
Right.
has helped reduce the cost of telecommunication. The fuel subsidy has also helped to reduce the cost of transportation, as well as fuel is an input item for production as well. So you're also at the same time you're killing multiple birds with the one policy killing addressing multiple issues. Production side, supply side, in terms of minimizing production cost, that fuel subsidy. And that has amounted to, before these measures, $300 billion annually. That is more than $300 billion is more than the oil revenues that we earn in 2023. This year
Mm.
we will touch maybe close to 300 billion. But these are measures that they have expanded on, removing VAT, providing more subsidies, maintaining the subsidies, the relief measures to household, increasing in wages, etc., increasing disposable income, has amounted to nearly $300 billion. Now, these measures are not a $60 billion. It will cost maybe about $80 billion now. You're talking about now these measures amounted to in excess of 400 billion, nearly $500 billion per annum in subsidized costs to help to alleviate prices and to help household to be able to afford, right, while building out on the supply side. So
Right.
these things I'm good. You see, what I want the viewers to understand, these are not simple and straightforward issues. These are very complex issues that the government, from a policy making standpoint, as well from an economic management standpoint, it's not an easy task based on
Right.
what we've explained, the different implications of the different options. So you got to choose which which one do I want? Which one do I want to live with? You understand? So I'll stop there on the inflation and I'll allow you to ask some questions.
So, so we got a good mouthful there. You mentioned a little bit about the impact. I wanted to know if you could go into some more detail in relation to the impact these measures would have on the Guyanese population.
Well, the impact is certainly it, particularly the low income segment of the population. From assessing from the short interviews that were done by some of the media houses and as well as the state media, as well as
Mm.
the excuse me, the general public, in terms of how they would utilize their uh, the cash grant. It will help that, particularly that segment of the population, to contend with their household bills, maybe pay a month rent, a few months grocery, bring that kind of relief. And of course,
Mm.
that's on the consumption side. Some household we would appreciate, or I appreciate that, yes, we can invest it. We can talk about all the financial literacy. We can talk about, putting it to a good use. But there are some households that they really needed to pay for some important household expenditure, whether it's a repair to the household, enhancement, or whatever the case is. So that is welcomed. Then, of course, you can explore all the other productive ways of utilizing the fund wisely, whether you choose to save it, whether you choose to pool the resources together, because now you have, in a household with more than one adult, a household with two adults, or over 18 years and over. Imagine a household with five persons 18 and over. That household will receive
Yeah.
500,000 that they did not plan for to spend for this year.
Right.
They could invest that and turn it around into millions. And there's so many things that you can do with 100,000, much less 500,000, in terms of creating other streams of sustainable income for the household, right? So the
Right.
impact would be in terms at the aggregate level for the economy. I would expect to see a spike in consumption spending. I would also expect to see people investing in productive activities in small businesses, or those who have small businesses, expanding on it. If you have a small chicken farm and you're doing 100 chickens or 200 chickens, you multiply
Yeah.
that, right?
Right.
So that you
Right.
create sustainable streams of income, right? And
Mm-mm.
there's so many opportunities now, so many opportunities. You just have to pay attention. But where I live, for example, you got about two wash bays. Imagine a wash bay. If you invest in a wash bay with all the vehicles on the road, and you're doing 20, 30 vehicles a day at $1,000 or $1,500.
Your wash is about 2,000 right now, brother.
Well, you see, and my car got washed. There was a time when I never believed in wash bay, but now I don't get time for what I don't get time to do so many things around the household.
Yeah.
My wife got to beat me up, quarrel with me, all kind of thing to get something done, right? Because there's so many things happening in the economy, in the society. People don't have time to do so many things. Those are opportunities for others to
Right.
create opportunities and to monetize solutions to those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Joel, I wanted to jump across to the customer price index. Um, this is used to measure the rate of inflation. Help us understand this a little better.
So the the consumer price index is an index which is developed, updated, and managed by the Bureau of Statistics. Now, every country has this index, which
Right.
is what is used to measure in the rate of inflation. Now, I've seen again a lot of misconception or misinterpretation of the CPI, right? And we gotta understand how to interpret it and how to read it. Now, it's made up of several indices. So, in that CPI, you have food prices, and food prices is the one that has had the highest increases or the highest rate of inflation over the past few years,
Mm,
6% and 7%. And that is consistent with what we see happening. Then you have telecommunications, transportation, health, etc. So if you look at it, housing is another sub-indice within that within that index. So if you look at the CPI table, which is published in the Bank of Ghana report, you would see that the base year is 2009.
okay.
So you would see at the top 2009 equal to 100, right? So from 2009 to 2023, the food price index has moved from 100 to 200, which means that from 2009 to 2023, food prices have increased by 100%. The other indices like transportation, telecommunication, housing, healthcare, etc., those have not had major increases. So the overall index over that period from 2009 to 2023 increased by 43%. From 2009 to 2023, increased by
Mm,
43%. But when you
okay.
look at, let's talk, so food is a given, right? Food is a given, 6%, 7%. Now, why is it that overall the consumer price index, which is the rate of inflation or the measurement for inflation, is within the low single digit. And people are saying, oh, this can't be accurate, etc., etc. It is because it is made up of a group of industries, and they all have different weight, and they all have moved differently from the base year. So food prices have increased. Food prices went up like this on the graph. And housing, for example, has actually reduced from 100 to 98%, has gone to 98. So it means the cost of housing has declined from 2009 position to 2023 by 2%. Now, is this realistic? Now, let me spend some time to explain that. The housing policy of the government is one of the most innovative and one of the most innovative and impactful policy that they have engineered since the vice president or the present vice president, since he was president back in 2009, 2010,
Mm.
when he engineered the housing, under his presidency rather, engineered the housing policy. What is the housing policy? Today, the interest rate on a home mortgage is below the market rate. The prime lending rate is about 11%. You could get a mortgage for as low as 3%, 4%, below the market rate. How was that made possible? It was made possible because the government removed the taxes, the corporate taxes on the interest earned on home loans so that banks could lower their
Okay.
interest rate. Now, that is one element of the government's housing policy. The second is they have distributed, they've invested heavily in the development of housing schemes across the country over the years, and they have made available land for low income, middle income, and high income families at subsidized cost. So that's two. So you have low cost mortgages below market rate, subsidized mortgages for, for housing loans. And then you have the
Mm.
land subsidized cost. Thirdly, a few years after that, they, they engineered another policy called the mortgage interest relief policy. The mortgage interest relief is where first time homeowners who are paying taxes and have a mortgage, the interest that they pay on the mortgage, once they're paying their taxes, they apply for the mortgage interest relief at the GRA, and the GRA gives them a check and give them back all the interest.
Okay.
That's a third element of the housing policy. So when you put these three elements together, what that means is that the housing policy of the government, a key component of that policy is whereby first-time homeowners could practically access interest-free loans for their homes.
Wow.
And that's a fact. Vis-a-vis the mortgage interest relief program, the interest, which is already a low cost, subsidized cost interest, you get back your interest from the GRA, from the government. And that is why that indice in the consumer price index, which is part of the consumer price index, from 2009 to present, it hasn't increased, but it declined by 2% because of the policy of the government to make home ownership affordable. And there are three key components of it, which I've explained, that yielded that result. The same
Mm.
thing with telecommunications. I could recall, and I'm sure all of us could recall, that today I have a postpaid plan on my mobile phone where I pay about, my plan that I have is about $8,000 a month. Postpaid. I pay $8,000 a month, unlimited data, unlimited
Yeah.
call, right? And my bill comes fixed every month. Before the liberalization of the telecommunication sector, before the removal of VAT, etc., from that sector by this government, we used to pay how much we used to spend three times the cost, three, four times the cost on mobile, on telecommunications.
Indeed.
Now we're paying a quarter of that. Now we're paying a quarter of what we were paying 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And so that is why I'm taking these two indices, take it and dissect it so that people could understand when you the consumer price index inflation rate of 5%, you got to understand that look at where is the food prices. Food prices have been increased, inflation 6%, 7%. Overall, the inflation rate is low because of these direct policies of the
Right.
government. And this is the implication or the impact of the policy. This is the result, which we are benefiting directly, uh, particularly housing, affordable housing, housing. The cost to own your own home today is cheaper than where it was in 2009. Telecommunications is a fraction of the cost where it was 5 years ago.
Right.
So I'll pause there.
So, Joel, the long and short of it, these measures, would they be inflationary? And if so, to what extent?
Right. Right, excellent question. So because this is a one-off grant and it's not a sustained grant, it will have impact on inflation, but it will be contained. It will not be to a large extent that would
Right.
result in a 3 or 4 percentage point increase in the inflation rate. I don't I don't see that happening because it is a one-off grant and because in my assumption you have the low income segment of the population that would likely spend on consumption, which is fine, which is understandable, and you have the middle income and the high income segment of the population. They would park it in a bank account or they would do something else, put it in a business or something that is productive. So I don't expect that 100% of the payout will be re-injected into the economy as consumption
Right.
expenditure because of that. Because it is one-off, it's not going to happen next year again, or
Right.
we're expecting it next year again. So it will have impact on inflation, but not to a large extent that it is escalated or result in hyperinflation, as some may think, or overheating. Not at
Yeah.
all.
Right. Right. Now, I wanna, because we running short on time. I wanna jump over to the oil and gas sector. Now, Suriname recently, as I said before, had their first FID in Block 58. The head of the National Oil and Gas Company over there in Suriname was quoted in the media saying that Suriname has a better deal than Guyana. Now, later he came to Guyana and said that what he said was distorted by the media. And in certain quarters in the media fraternity here in Guyana, they took it and ran with it. And it was seen as in a manner that was seeming to attack the government of Guyana. Now, can you help us understand the Suriname fiscal regime versus the Guyana's fiscal regime, and give the viewers some background and context in relation to that?
So, great question. So, Suriname has in fact been in oil production long before Guyana.
Mm,
Staatsolie, which is the national oil company of Suriname, was established since in the 70s or 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And so they have had onshore oil production since then.
right,
This is the first time that they're going into the offshore oil production and made a significant offshore discovery of a commercial nature. This is the first time. So that's the first thing. Suriname has been, let's establish that firstly. Suriname has been in the oil and gas business, oil and gas production for many decades before Guyana.
Right.
The second thing is, you would recall that when the 2016 production sharing agreement or the petroleum agreement that the APNU AFC negotiated or renegotiated with Exxon in 2015, 2016. And when they announced what is the deal, it is 2% royalty and 50% profit. They were heavily, heavily criticized. And in their defense, the minister then, Trotman, said that this is the PPP deal, this is the PPP production chain agreement that they had, and he's correct, that had the 50%, and they had 1%, and we give 2% now. So that's a big deal from 1% to 2%. Now I say this because I want to establish some historical facts. It is true that the model production sharing agreement, we have had a petroleum law since in the 80s, very old petroleum law. And so all the petroleum
Right.
licenses, exploration licenses that were issued in the in the 90s and so on, particularly Exxon in the 1999 agreement, they were issued on the pursuant to the 19, I can't remember the exact year, but the old petroleum law, which was enacted since in the 80s or maybe 70s. And so it is true that the fiscal terms that the PPP government in that period, it contained a 50% profit, so they did not change that and 1% royalty. Now at that time, there was no commercial fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that defense of, oh, we bring 2%, that's totally nonsensical, right? But that's not the point. What I want to establish is that the 50% profit share was in fact the original model developed by the PPP since then. Coming now to the Suriname fiscal regime for their oil and gas sector. It contains 6.25% royalty, 30% corporate corporate taxes, and 20% profit oil. Now, on the surface of it, when you put that against our 2% royalty and 50% profit, what Suriname has 6.25% versus 2% royalty and 20% profit and 30% taxes on more than their more than our 50% profit, even no corporate income tax. But to really determine who really has a better deal, you really got to model it out because these are very complex financial engineering. I
Right.
would put it that way, complex financial engineering. So you can't determine that 6.25% and 30% tax and 20% profit share is better than our 2% and 50%. No, I'm not defending the 50% and 2%, but I'm just establishing this. So
Yeah.
now, the important point to note with respect to the incumbent, the PPP administration, the PPP government, is that they understood the implications that Exxon in 2019, Exxon did something that was clever. They knew that following the no confidence motion, that you're going to have elections, you're supposed to have it constitutionally in 3 months. They quickly moved to production
Mm.
in 2019. You know why they did that? I'm deviating a little bit here into the Exxon politics here. Exxon deliberately moved to production in December 2019 because that move was to do two things. A, it was to support the incumbent. It was to help the incumbent win the election, which is the APNU AFC. Many people don't know that. But when you understand oil, the politics of oil, you will understand why they did that. The second thing they did by moving to production before you have a change of government, you lock in the agreement now. So when the new government come in, they're locked in to the stability clause. And the
Right.
stability clause says both parties have to agree. Exxon done said publicly that no, it's not going to happen. Now that's Exxon's politics. That's the politics of oil. Notwithstanding that, the government has committed to the people of Guyana, the PPP government has committed to the people of Guyana that notwithstanding the 2016 deal, which we have criticized and we have described as a lopsided deal, that we will find ways to maximize the value to the country, by extension, the people of Ghana. How did they do that? And this is how you have to do the comparative analysis, not just looking at 6 versus 2 and 30 versus 0, right? This is how, what did they do to achieve the objective of maximizing the value to the country with a lopsided deal? They did several things by way of policy. First, they said we're going to bring local content and we're going to legislate local content. Because the way the oil companies work, again, comes back to the politics of oil. If it is not law, they will not, they are not obligated to comply with it. Trinidad and Tobago has a local content policy forever. Find out from a Trinidadian policymaker how compliant are the oil companies with their local content
Mm,
policy. See, very minimal compliance. We have had tremendous, great success because we have moved the legislation.
mm,
You don't
mm.
have, you're not obligated to, or you go come up with some kind of excuse. My baby is crying, she's hungry. Yeah.
You got 3 more minutes.
So we move to legislation. So that's one. Secondly, they were opposed to the gas to energy project. We get them to agree to that. We now having the gas to energy, which would generate about a billion US or $200 billion in benefits, direct and indirect benefits.
Right.
So between those the gas to energy and local content, we're getting about 3 billion US dollars more annually in benefits. 3 billion,
Right.
sorry, 2 billion US dollars more or $400 billion Guyana dollars more annually in benefits at a minimum. And as production increases and we build up capacity, that 400 billion annually will increase. Local content spend will increase. The benefits from gas to energy will increase over time. The third thing is, and most importantly, is the government said, as a matter of policy, that we will ramp up production and so accommodate, we will create the environment to accommodate the quick ramping up of oil production from 100,000 to over 1 million barrels in the shortest period of time. That is a government policy. And I see people are saying that Exxon, and there was a time when Exxon was taking credit for this. And recently I saw Exxon corrected themselves after I made articulated it publicly that it is not Exxon alone, it is the policy of the government to have that policy to ramp up production because that's how you're going to maximize the value now. So by
Right.
2030, we'll be producing 1.5 million barrels per day. And you know how much Suriname going to be producing by 2030? Suriname will be producing 2028. We're already producing over 600,000 barrels. By 2028, they will be producing 220,000 barrels per day when we will be producing 1.5 million barrels per day. And you know
Wow.
what we will be earning in actual terms? At current prices, we will be earning in actual terms $14 billion annually post recovery, US
Wow.
dollars. Suriname will be getting a fraction of that annually because they are not on a path to ramp up production and they don't have the level of oil finds to ramp up production to match with us. So because of that policy, particularly, main, primarily, we have a better deal in actual terms. And lastly, quickly, when you now model
Wow.
it, When you understand the fiscal terms and you apply it, Suriname has Statsoli, which is the national oil company, has a higher debt, what you call a debt to equity ratio of 74%, meaning they're financing their operations with a higher level of debt compared to Guyana,
Mm,
which is about 30%. The ratio is about maybe 50%. So what does that mean? It means you have a higher interest cost, which reduces your taxable income. A higher interest cost reduces your taxable income in relationship to revenue. So because of that, that in actual terms would reduce their net take, the effective actual earnings that they would get in contrast to what we will have,
yeah. All right.
right?
Joel,
So I'll pause there. I don't want to go too much more into the technical. I think I made the point.
well, we gotta leave something for the next show. We can't get them everything here one time.
Right, right.
So, Joel, thank you for being here with us. We will be back here again on the 6th of November for the next program. So, guys, please share this live so that we get the information out there. I'd like to thank Joel for taking the time to break down or I should say, share all this information with us in relation to the government's relief efforts and also to give us a better idea of the complexities in the oil and gas sector, especially between Guyana and Suriname. Joel, thank you again for being here, and I'll allow you to enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll wrap up the program.
Thank you very much, Cardell. We certainly pick up from where we left off, and I see some questions in the comments. We could incorporate that when we meet again.
Right,
So
great.
thank you. Good
Thank you,
night to
Joel, and
everyone. Thank you.
take care. Right. So, guys, thank you all for being here for the debut episode of Behind the Agenda. Stay with us as we explore these topics and more on Behind the Agenda, where the plans, policies, and progress take center stage with Joel Bagudin's analysis of the landscape of the country. We aim to provide you with the information you need to make informed decisions for yourself and your family. This is Behind the Agenda, where understanding today shapes tomorrow. See you on November 6th for our next episode. Take care.
Impact to the oil and gas sea. Together we'll build a future strong and keen. Don't dive deep now. Don't get keen. We'll dive into the data. The numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda.